The city woke to sirens that did not belong to morning. Zürich's glass towers, normally mirrors to the lake's blue composure, flickered with red strobes as AlpenSky 271 came in too fast, too low, its flaps not biting as they should, its nose wobbling like a tightrope walker who has seen the wind shift. On Kirchplatz, office workers glued themselves to phone screens while the tram paused at a traffic light as if even engines needed to inhale. A passenger would later say that the descent felt like a long staircase, missing every other step. Another remembered the cabin crew's smiles folding into masks of arithmetic. Count the rows to the nearest exit, secure the carts, speak calmly. Don't let the fear show up to work. At 07:49, the Airbus kissed the runway, a rough peck that smeared rubber into smoke. The first bounce came from the main gear, the second, harder one, from the city's collective heart. The captain's voice, Marcus Keller, 45, Swiss precise in speech and shirt creases, cracked with the familiar cadence of control. Brace, brace. Coffee cups leapt. A baby shrieked. Then everyone's inner child joined in silence. For a second, the plane tried to float again, a bird reconsidering ground. Then the spoilers finally sprang like startled cats, thrust reversers growled awake, and AS271, shedding a trail of sparks from a protesting wheel, began to believe in stopping. Out on the perimeter road, a cyclist held a breath till it snapped. Fire engines, already rolling from the moment the crew declared Mayday on short final, lunged toward the strip. Foam trucks spat white arcs that looked almost festive until you remembered the stakes. Inside, Nadia Baumgartner pressed her forehead to the seatback in front of her, feeling the aircraft's shudders travel bone to bone. She thought of the text she had typed just before approach, landing in snow, love you, and wondered if misspelling could negotiate with fate. The plane stopped angled, a stubborn door not quite closed. One tire lay gnarled to the rim like a chewed pencil. The oxygen smell hung metallic in the cabin. When the door opened, March air barged in with its alpine honesty, smelling of cold and truth. Cameras bloomed everywhere. Passengers, ramp workers, a gate agent with trembling hands. Someone live-streamed, someone prayed, someone made a joke that no one laughed at and would later regret for a long time. By 08:03, headlines had their verbs: miracle, heroic, flawless emergency landing in Zurich, no fatalities. The airport's PA returned to telling people not to leave bags unattended, as if the morning had been a small detour. The aircraft was towed away with a blue tarp covering its most photogenic wounds. Officials in grey suits began to speak in paragraphs. They pronounced the word investigation in 3 languages and in the secret 4th language of public relations. Nothing to see here but our competence. The city exhaled, grateful to resume being Swiss, the kind of place where clocks apologize for being a second late. But a few small facts refused to file themselves away. An ambulance door slamming too often for a no-injuries day. A maintenance van idling near Hangar 4 when the plane should have parked elsewhere. A controller who didn't show up for the debrief because she had finally collapsed into a chair and sleep conquered her like a winter. Far from the runway, on the 4th floor of an apartment in Kreis 5, journalist Lina Morell rewound the passenger videos again and again. A breath caught on audio at the exact moment the spoilers lagged. A glimpse in the reflection of a window, of a cockpit display blinking amber before the flare. And the way the fire chief glanced off camera right before answering a softball question. Lina lifted her phone, then set it down. She had learned to wait out her pulse. The truth hates urgency even when urgency loves the truth. The city was already praising the landing's neat ending. But endings that tidy often hide boxes, and boxes contain things that rattle. The press conference at 11 GA was choreographed like a watch advertisement. The backdrop was airport blue, the logos were geometrically humble, the podium microphones pointed like polite questions. Spokespeople slid between German, French and Italian with the inclusive ease of a place that sells chocolate in multiple tongues. English came last, as if hospitality were a dessert. The official story was crisp. A routine technical malfunction resolved by expert crew. Standard emergency response, 0 fatalities, a handful of minor injuries treated on site. They even remembered to praise the passengers' calm, a way of flattering the audience into complicity. Questions came soft, broad, and designed to be folded back into the answers. How did the crew remain so composed? Training. How quickly did first responders arrive? Within minutes. Was there any risk to the city? No. Would operations return to normal? They already had. Lina, in the second row, raised her hand, but the moderator's eyes learned not to see her. One more, he said, selecting a lifestyle blogger who asked how the airline would support nervous flyers. The spokesperson smiled. We take care of our guests. The word guests did complicated work, scrubbing customers into a family photo. The official narrative had the neat cadence of a metronome, and Lina wrote it down anyway, not because she believed it, but because quoting matters when you later measure truth against the weights people try to hang on it. She noted the points where sentences went vague. Technical issue, standard procedure, industry-leading response. Vague as a room with the lights off where anything could be furniture. Afterward, Lina stood outside with her recorder still on, catching the accidental honesty of footsteps, cigarette drags, and a ground handler muttering, "Hangar 4 again." She pretended to take a call while watching a convoy of airport vehicles head exactly where the aircraft had not. Hangar 4 belonged to AlpenSky's contracted maintenance provider, Aeromech Helvetia. The tarp hiding AS271 scrapes traveled not toward the usual domestic ramp, but under the shadow of that hangar, where windows wore the tint of secrets. She texted a friend in ATC, "You safe?" The reply took an hour. Long night, no details. "We'll talk later, off-grid." Another message unsent began, "Did you guys switch runways late?" She deleted it. Questions are like seeds. If you plant them too early, they drown. The afternoon news layered adjectives on the captain. Veteran. Decorated. Calm under pressure. He was all those things, and it was true that he had wrestled a skidding machine onto concrete that morning, but hero stories cast long shadows where other people crouch. In the shadows waited a young first officer who had pumped the brakes too hard on the first bounce, because in the sim, you don't smell burning rubber. There, too, waited a dispatch decision at Geneva that pushed the departure to beat a slot restriction. And in that same dark sat a maintenance log entry that someone had copied by hand the night before because the software had been undergoing updates, a phrase that too often means the ledger will not be checked until after the exam. At home, Lina watched again. The footage from Seat 21A, the live stream from an airport employee with a username that mentioned a football club, the crisp, heavily edited airline video with uplifting strings. She slowed them, muted them, listened only to the engine's vowels. The lag in the spoiler deployment nagged. On the A320 family, it should be immediate after touchdown if armed. But if armed was the question. She wrote in her notebook, "Spoilers, armed," and underlined it twice. Then another note. Controller voice on tower tape. Hoarse. She called the hospital to ask whether any passengers were admitted. "Only minor injuries," a receptionist said. A beat. Then honesty showed its hem. "But a flight attendant from that flight is upstairs. She hurt her wrist. And the smoke..." The voice trailed. "Which room?" Lina asked. "I'm not allowed to say," the receptionist said, the present tense of new rules. The official story flowed downhill, smoothing edges. Lina could feel rocks under the water. Journalism is a muscle that atrophies in comfort, and Zürich is nothing if not comfortable. Lina was good precisely because she distrusted ease. She kept her office messy for luck. A collage of FOIA responses, a coffee mug stained in rings like tree growth, a corkboard hung with yarn, not because it helped, but because it amused her to pretend she was in a detective show. On the board now, she pinned a fresh card, AS271, March 14th. Underneath it, videos nobody aired. People forget that public information has a private life before it appears, varnished in press kits. Lina's first break came from an anonymous email with a link that looked like spam and a password that felt like a dare. Inside, 2 clips. The first, CCTV from a service corridor facing the maintenance road behind Hangar 4, time-stamped 06.02. It showed a technician in a neon vest, hood up against sleet, wheeling a portable hydraulic cart toward a parked A320. The tail number matched AS271's. The second, shorter clip, showed the same tech at 06:35, wiping his gloves on a rag and glancing toward a door as if he knew cameras had eyes. She froze frames and zoomed until the pixels became constellations. A blurred label on the cart read, "Spoiler Actuator Fluid." Not precise, not conclusive, but enough to ask smarter questions. If there had been work on the spoiler system overnight, it should exist in the log. She called a source at Aeromek Helvetia, a man who liked to talk about soccer and whose conscience had been limber lately. He picked up on the second ring. "I can't do this today," he said without hello. "What this?" Lina asked. "You know," he said, "the plane from this morning, everyone is tense. Was there unscheduled maintenance?" she asked. "Everything is scheduled if you write it in after," he said, aiming for a joke and hitting confession. "Listen," he added, voice dropping as if words weighed more when quiet. "We had a task on the spoilers last night. There was a service bulletin, not mandatory yet. It's fine." The way he said fine sounded like a wish. "Was the system defueled and refueled?" she asked, using the jargon to offer him a soft landing. "We had to isolate one hydraulic line. There was someone new on the team. He meant well. The supervisor signed off." "What's his name?" she asked. "Silence is where names hide." "Ravi," he said finally, "but don't destroy him. He's in this country on that special permit. He sends money home." Lina wrote Ravi, night shift, spoilers, and underlined it. She would find him, but not yet. First, she needed the other half of her hunch. The tower tapes. A friend in ATC, Paul, liked her because she had once gotten a correction printed in a national paper when they misquoted him. Corrections by grace. She pinged him end to end. "Coffee?" he answered with a pin. When she arrived, he looked like a man who had slept 3 hours across 4 chairs. "We got a late runway switch," he said, eyes on the door. "Wind backed around fast. We went from 14 to 16 at the last minute. The system flagged it, but I'd been on since midnight, and the relief didn't show because he was sick, and we're under this hiring freeze. It's not excuses, it's context." He swallowed a bitter laugh. "Everybody loves context until it turns into blame." "Was separation tight?" she asked. "Tight but legal," he said. "There was a heavy ahead. We extended their role because of a brake temp advisory. That put the slot for 271 right on the line. The captain asked for a long landing to keep speed. I cleared it. On a dry day, routine. But we had sleet and then..." He lifted his palms. "You saw. Did you declare minimum fuel calls from them?" Lina asked. "Dispatch filed them lean to beat a slot out of Geneva," he said. "Nothing illegal, but it limits choices. They couldn't hold long. My voice on the tape. I can hear the hours in it. That's on me." He slid across a small recorder. "You didn't get this from me," he said. "There's also something else you should know. The airline's PR called the tower chief before the press conference." "What did they ask?" "Not to mention the runway switch." Lina felt the hunch settle into a skeleton. Maintenance at dawn. An exhausted controller, fuel planning that shaved margins, and a messaging strategy that publicized skill while burying the price paid for it. She thought of Nadia pressing her head against plastic somewhere near row 21 and wondered why we only count bodies when they stop breathing. Ravi Mehta carried Switzerland in his pocket as a laminated card that expired in May. He had come from Basel by train years ago and stayed because machines did not mind his accent. Aeromek Helvetia paid him fare, and most nights he wore fatigue like a medal. The week before the landing, a service bulletin fluttered through the hangar like mail that no one wanted to sign for. It concerned the spoiler actuator return lines on certain A320 serials, a clamp that could abrade a hose under specific vibrations. Not urgent, not mandatory, but everyone knew not urgent sometimes meant we'll be sorry later. On March 13th, the job order formed like a snowflake, specific, delicate, and likely to melt under heat. The senior tech, Ueli, assigned Ravi to prep and inspect the left-wing actuator area on the aircraft tail number HBAZL, AlpenSky's AS271 Morning Bird. Isolate the green system, Ueli said, pointing to the hydraulic panel. Tag out. We'll refuel the lines after check. The hangar clock said 22:11. The coffee pot said murder. Ravi did the steps as the manual sang them, but manuals are hymns written for Sundays. He isolated, tagged, bled pressure, and loosened a clamp. The return line came off a fraction skewed, and a drop, just one, slid where it shouldn't. He caught it with the rag, then replaced the line, tightened the clamp, and wrote a note for refuel and function test. Willie signed the pre-close at 01:42 with an old man's neat block letters. Outside, sleet licked the tarmac. Inside, someone joked about the national team, and someone else switched the playlist back to 80s synth-pop because routine is a charm against mistakes. The refuel and test should have happened at 05:30. It didn't. A shift change ate the memo. A supervisor wandered off to handle a battery cart request. Ravi, off-shift, lingered because new fathers don't know how to go home to small, smelly miracles and act casual. He saw the A320's nav lights wink alive and felt the gut punch that comes when a thing you meant to finish decides to fly without telling you. He waved at a marshaller, who shrugged. Ravi walked fast to the wing, saw the placard still hanging, isolate green, yanked it, and tucked it in his pocket like contraband. He told himself the system would self-bleed on taxi. It often did. He told himself the spoilers would arm fine. They usually did. He told himself many sentences with calming verbs. When Lina found him 2 days later, he had slept 5 hours in 2 nights. She approached with no recorder visible and a softness that wasn't an act. "I'm not here to ruin you," she said. "I'm here because ruin arrived anyway, and the only thing we can choose is whether it teaches." He stared at his hands, as if they could confess without him. "I didn't complete a function test," he said finally. "The return line, there might have been air, tiny. On touchdown, the spoilers didn't pop on the first contact. They came a second late. And the first officer, I read that he pumped the brakes when they bounced. Heat, pressure, rubber. Did you report it?" Lina asked. He nodded. "Internally. My supervisor told me to keep it quiet until the investigation set scope. He said we don't want to confuse the narrative." Ravi smiled without humor. "Narratives are only confused if you think truth is linear. Were you trained on the newest bulletins?" she asked. "A webinar," he said. "A PDF in my inbox. English technical, not the English I learned. Whaley translated the spirit but not the letter." Lina didn't promise anything. Promises are currency in short supply. She asked him to draw the steps on a legal pad. He did. She took photos. She asked if she could use his first name. He said yes after a pause that carried a country. Before she left, he took the folded placard from his wallet and placed it on the table. "Isolate green. Souvenir," he said. "Proof," she said. "There are mistakes forged in arrogance and mistakes hammered from fatigue. This one was minted from 100 small pressures, a hiring freeze, a late-night shift, a software update, a service bulletin written in a language everyone spoke but not everyone could read. The cost of a second lived its invoice on the runway. The tower at Zürich is a glass chapel for secular prayer. Controllers bless metal with clearances and hold back catastrophe with phraseology. On the night before the landing, the wind had been a fidgety guest. It came down the lake, then reversed, then sulked in crossflow. Paul's console told the story in vectors that danced like stubborn children. He stretched between calls, rolled his neck, and drank the bitter coffee that lives in every control room in the world. At 06:58, a heavy departed with brake temp warnings that demanded a longer roll and a slow turn. The clock ate the margin allocated to the next arrival. AS271 checked in on approach, the captain's tone crisp. Zürich Tower, AlpenSky 271, ILS 14. Paul watched the wind scrawl its graffiti on the screen and made a call that would later be described as within procedures and also unfortunate. He switched the arrival to runway 16 to give the headwind back to the pilots. The system chimed like a reminder from a disappointed parent. He acknowledged. Behind him, the relief that never came was still a ghost in the doorway. AlpenSky 271. Runway change to 16, continue, expect late clearance, he said, voice a half-tone hoarser than usual. Copy 16, Keller replied. We're minimum fuel. It was not a declaration, just a status slipped under the door of urgency. Paul did math quickly. How many were inbound? How many could he vector? Where was that snow cell that had been flirting with the lake? He gave the heavier head more time than the schedule would permit on a sunny day. He could hear his instructor from years ago. Legal isn't always safe. Safe isn't always legal. Your job is to make the best of both. The tape would later catch a tremor in his next clearance. Fatigue makes vowels wobble. AlpenSky 271. Cleared to land 16. Caution, possible braking action medium. The caution was a gift wrapped in bureaucracy. Keller took it and asked for a long landing to keep energy. Approved, Paul said, slicing his own margin thinner, their voices braided like climbers on one rope. When the spoilers lagged and the first bounce stole friction, Paul's chest flamed cold. He watched the icon on his screen, and the fire trucks in his peripheral vision moved before his command because routine has its own reflexes. Emergency equipment roll, he said anyway, because saying it is part of making it true. The plane stayed upright, the second bounce uglier, the final settle a miracle that no one would call a miracle because the paperwork hates that word. After the stop, his supervisor clapped his shoulder in solidarity that felt like Blame's prequel. Good work, the supervisor said. We'll log the runway switch as weather-driven. Paul didn't argue. He would save his voice for the debrief he never got because the press conference needed a clean diagram of the morning. He wrote notes anyway. Times, winds, phraseology, phrases he wished he could paste back inside his mouth. When Lina later played him clips from the passengers, he listened with a flinch he tried to hide. I sound tired, he said. You were, she replied. That's not a crime. He gave her the same look he gave the wind, grudging respect. It is when the headline wants a villain, he said. She shook her head. Headlines want a shape. I'm trying to draw the right one. He told her about the staffing memo that had floated across their break room a month earlier, informing them that replacements for retirements would be delayed till Q3. He told her about the internal tool that had crashed twice in a week. He told her about how he practiced saying unable in the mirror after a supervisor once scolded him for using it too much. Controllers are trained to be polite to physics, he said. But management prefers we be polite to schedules. From the tower, the city looks small and manageable. From inside a life, everything is a little too close to see. The videos that mattered weren't the ones looping on breakfast TV. They were the shaky, ordinary, uncinematic clips made by people who didn't know they were pointing their cameras at an argument between systems and seconds. Lina received them through a ladder of trust. The flight attendant with the sprained wrist, the ground handler with a soccer username, a firefighter's cousin who had filmed because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. One sequence pieced together spanned 3 minutes no broadcaster aired. It started with a shot from the mid-cabin as the plane bounced, a chorus of trays clattering like percussion in a modern symphony. A voice, not crew, shouted "spoilers," as if naming the missing thing could conjure it. The next clip from the service road caught the moment the tire shredded itself into vocabulary only rubber understands. The third, from the fire engine dash, saw the foam begin to sketch safety around the aircraft, seconds before the second bounce had fully forgotten to be a threat. But the clip Lina loved for its stubborn truth was the shortest, a reflection in the terminal window, a ghost image of the cockpit through glass and glare, an amber caution light winking steadily until a hand, whose hand, tapped a reset, and the light went out like a lie that thinks darkness is privacy. She sent stills to 3 pilots she trusted. 2 said caution lights do that, 1 said not on that page. She added a note, investigate ECAM sequence. Where had the videos been? Hidden in ongoing investigation folders, protected by legal phrases that said not for public distribution, and by people who believed that showing the messy middle of survival undermined confidence. A city that depends on schedules does not want to be reminded that the universe adores dice. The airline had received copies for training. The regulator had copies for context. The public had the clean ending and an edited hero montage. Lina emailed the airline for comment on the amber light. A press officer replied with a tone you could iron a shirt with. We do not comment on speculative analyses derived from unauthorized materials, it said. She answered with 3 sources and 2 questions that were not speculative. Silence, a bureaucratic masterpiece. She filed a formal request with the regulator for non-identifying materials related to the incident. The auto-reply confirmed receipt and promised response within 30 days, just long enough for a narrative to harden. So she published a small piece instead, not the big one yet, a teaser built from publicly visible threads, the late runway switch, the minimum fuel call, the maintenance van near Hangar 4. She didn't accuse, she asked. The reaction surprised her. Instead of lawyers first, she received humans. A passenger wrote to say his daughter now refused to get on trams. A ramp worker wrote that he had nightmares about foam. A controller from another country wrote, "Your questions are fair." And then an email arrived with no subject line from a burner account. "You forgot the dispatch pressure." Attached, a screenshot of an internal chat where a dispatcher had written, "If we miss the slot, we get hell. Push at 06:15, not 06:20. We'll be tight on Zürich arrival, but within limits." Limits are the magic trick of modern life, a line we call safety because the other side is expensive. Lina printed the screenshot and taped it on the wall under AS271. The wall looked like a conspiracy, but was only a family portrait of small decisions that did not know they were related until it was too late. Corporate pressure does not arrive barking. It purrs in dashboards and KPIs, in quarterly targets discussed with pastries on the table. AlpenSky prided itself on on-time performance. Punctuality is a national identity here, a virtue. The week before the incident, someone upstairs had urged dispatch to optimize block times and reduce slack. Slack is the invisible bubble wrap around catastrophe. Remove it, and the package arrives on time until it doesn't. Lina's source in dispatch, a woman named Ava, met her in a cafe where nobody took cash anymore. "We're not cowboys," Ava said, before the cappuccinos cooled. "We don't break rules, but we massage them." She described a culture where the difference between fuel that makes everyone happy and fuel that makes pilots relaxed was a spreadsheet cell-colored green. "We plan legally," she said, "but we plan to win the slot." She showed Lina a log from the morning of March 14th. The plan gave AS271 legal reserves with a weather line that had been optimistic. "We forecast the snow to stay teasing," Eva said. It flirted, and then it showed up. In another screenshot, a manager wrote, "Remind crews to accept runway changes when offered, keeps flow upright." A sensible message in isolation, but compound it with fatigue and systems not quite bled, and a city that doesn't suffer lateness, and sense starts to look like vanity. No one told Keller what maintenance had done, Eva added, because nothing had failed. Not yet. We share failures. We don't share almost failures. Lina asked about the post-incident messaging. Eva's mouth tilted. PR takes the wheel. Safety writes a report. PR writes a story. Both use the word findings. One means truths we discovered. The other means truths that won't cost us market share. She slid an envelope across. Inside, printouts of anonymized shift rosters showing controllers scheduled thin and mechanics carrying double nights in the same fortnight. It's not malice, Eva said. It's arithmetic in a world that worships efficiency. Our gods demand offerings. Lina knew the risk of building a cathedral from scraps, but the scraps aligned with the physics of what the videos and the runway rubber said. She plotted a timeline on a whiteboard and taped down names with colored markers so that the humans didn't disappear under systems. At each node, she wrote a cost that wasn't in money. Ravi's visa anxiety, Paul's sore throat, Keller's insomnia since a go-around years ago, Nadia's daughter's fear of trams. The ledger of aviation counts seat miles, the ledger of living counts breaths. She sent the airline a list of bullet questions with yes, no answers, the sort that short-circuit word games. Did maintenance isolate the green hydraulic system on HBAZL on March 13? Was a function test performed prior to release? Did dispatch plan AS271 with minimum additional fuel beyond legal reserve? Did tower staffing deviate from standard on March 14? Did PR request that ATC not mention the runway switch in public briefings? The reply came from legal. Your inquiries contain incorrect assumptions. We are cooperating fully with authorities. She sighed. Cooperation is often a synonym for delay. She set a date on her calendar anyway, March 28th. Publish, regardless. Statistics are polite to the living. No fatalities. Sounds like a high five from the gods. But Nadia's daughter Mira began to count buses. She refused to sit by windows. She woke at 03 Zag with the same scraped scream that the tire had made and had to be walked in circles until the room's corners forgave her. The flight attendant with the sprained wrist was named Luis. He had planned to propose in April, but now postponed because he could not hold a ring box without seeing foam. A ramp worker quit to become a barista because coffee doesn't bounce. Captain Keller, celebrated in profiles that used the words unflappable and stoic, avoided driving past the airport. He took trains he once mocked for slowness. At home, he took apart a toy plane with his son and was surprised to find that he could not put it back together without wanting to cry. The first officer, name withheld in most stories, developed a cough that sounded like guilt. He replayed the simulator in his head, the instruction to let the spoilers and reversers ride the physics, to ease off the brakes on the first bounce. He knew he had pumped. He knew it had been instinct. He knew instinct is the early draft of wisdom, and he wanted a chance to edit. Paul kept working nights because sleep refused him in daylight. Ravi counted his steps to the tram to keep from counting seconds between touch and spoiler deploy. Eva wondered how many optimizations it took to call something brittle. Lina, for her part, felt the old nausea that comes when you've gathered enough truth to hurt people and also to help them, and you must decide which bruise matters. The city moved on, mostly. People are resilient or pretending. But in the small spaces, between tram stops, at the sink before bed, in the minute your phone searches for Wi-Fi, tiny films played of wheels smoking and a child's cry. No fatalities is a relief and a curse. It closes wallets, it ends meetings. It lets managers say, see, the system worked. The system did work, in the sense that a net works when you fall and break a wrist instead of your neck. But perhaps the question is why we fell. Lina wrote a draft that didn't accuse, it assembled. She braided quotes with audios, screenshots with annotations, physics with the poetry of what people felt. She wrote a line she knew would be hated. When we edit out the near miss, we train the next accident. She asked Keller for comment. He declined, then sent a single sentence 2 days later. Please be fair to my first officer. She promised, and this time she meant it out loud. On March 28th at 06:02, Lina's story went live. The headline refused drama, but invited attention. The hidden truth. The seconds Zürich didn't see on March 14th. The subhead did the work. Maintenance shortcuts, dispatch pressure, and a controller on his 23rd hour, a timeline of how an emergency landing became a near miss the public was never shown. The piece began with the morning, the bounce, the smoke, the baby's cry, and then unspooled backward. It embedded the videos with blurred faces and captioned the amber caution with a question. It quoted Ravi without his last name, Paul with his. It printed the isolate green placard in a sidebar like a relic. It reproduced the dispatch chat and paired it with a graph of block times squeezed in Q1. It showed the staffing roster with the thinness circled and a footnote about the hiring freeze. Reactions frosted the internet immediately. Pilots wrote in, some angry at the implication that spoilers lag can be maintenance fault. Others grateful someone finally said what everyone says in crew rooms. Mechanics wrote about the tyranny of checklists done at 02 hours with body clocks rioting. Controllers wrote about the poetry of unable, how it feels like failure to say and wisdom to mean. The airline replied with a new statement full of forward-looking verbs, reviewing, enhancing, recommitting. The regulator, stirred from its procedural slumber, announced an expanded scope for its inquiry and asked for supplementary data from ATC and maintenance. Inside AlpenSky, meetings multiplied. The safety department, which had been sidelined in favor of PR, suddenly found chairs for everyone. A manager suggested disciplining the dispatch agent whose chat had leaked. Eva answered, discipline the incentives, not the messengers. In the tower, Paul got an email offering counseling that also reminded him not to speak to press. He scheduled the counseling and deleted the email. Keller called Lina. You were fair, he said. You will get accused of hating aviation. She laughed softly. Aviation is how I get home to my mother, she said. I love it enough to want it honest. He was quiet. I asked my FO to read your piece, he said. He cried, then he slept, the first in 2 weeks. By evening, national news outlets had asked Lina to appear. She said no to most of them. She understood that TV loves seconds and hates nuance. She did one radio interview with a host who let her say hydraulics without asking for a synonym. You make this sound like a Greek chorus, the host said. Maintenance, ATC, dispatch, PR. She smiled into the microphone. We are all chorus until something goes wrong. Then the soloist takes the blame. The regulator's final report would take months, then years. These things age like wine and apologies. But within weeks, AlpenSky announced changes. More fuel on certain routes in winter operations, mandatory function tests after any hydraulic isolation, with digital sign-off that could not be updated after the fact, an internal amnesty window for near-miss reporting, a hiring push at maintenance bases, a donation to a mental health fund for first responders. PR made a video. Safety made a checklist. Between them, reality tried to find space to breathe. Paul worked days for a while. He practiced saying unable in staff meetings. Sometimes people rolled eyes. Sometimes they nodded like converts at their first sermon. Ravi completed another training, this time in person, with a translator and hands-on components that made the PDF blush. He also brought his daughter to see a plane from the observation deck and showed her how wings use air the way fish use water. She squealed with delight in a way that made him believe in second drafts for humans. Keller returned to flying after a check ride where the examiner looked him in the eye and said, "You are allowed to be human." The first officer took a break longer than HR preferred and came back slower, which is to say, better. Eva moved to safety from dispatch, bringing with her a calculator and a spine. Lina won an award she didn't hang because awards glare in apartments. Instead, she kept the isolate green placard above her desk as a personal conscience. The city kept time. Trams chimed. Watches sold. The lake reflected weather and wealth, and sometimes, when the angle was right, a sky that looked forgiving. People boarded flights and posted their wing photos with captions in 3 languages. Under a handful of those wings, clamps held hoses that had been checked twice. In the tower, a controller yawned and then laughed at himself and then said, into the headset, "Unable. Say intentions." Lina visited Nadia and Mira. The girl rode a tram again, holding Lina's recorder as if it bestowed courage. "Did the plane break?" she asked. "Not exactly," Lina said. "People broke a little. Then they fixed what they could." The girl nodded, as if this made plain sense. It does to children, because they have not yet learned the adult superstition that systems are gods. In the end, the hidden truth was not a single revelation. It was a choir of small, ordinary, unglamorous facts that, when sung together, sounded like warning and hope. The landing that shook the city did not need a villain to teach its lesson. It needed witnesses brave enough to keep the messy parts in the frame. And so, the next time a plane touches down and a baby cries and someone claps and someone else rolls their eyes, remember, survival is not the absence of failure. It is the choreography of second chances.